Hello there, this is Lee Thurburn again, and I want to first of all encourage you to watch the book review that I did last week of the book The End of the World is Just the Beginning by Peter Zeihan. This is not a review, this is a critique of that book. So first, let me reiterate what I said in my review of the book. This is an excellent book. This is one of the most consequential books of the last 50 years. It is a book you should buy and you should study because the amount of information that's in here is phenomenal. Now, with that said, it's time to present a critique and to draw your attention to some of the assumptions and the logic that are a little bit more debatable than Peter Zeihan would have you believe. First, regarding the long march of history. Now, Peter does present history in a novel manner that is surprisingly simple and profound. He does, however, simplify certain aspects that are significant, such as that there has been a growing, ever-growing, and ever greater degree of a sort of rule of law that is present both within nations and occurring in the interactions between nations. This is something that certainly has accelerated after World War II, and this is a large part of the premise of the order coming on the heels of the Bretton Woods Conference that Peter talks about in the book. But it was also increasing prior to the World War II conflagration, and it can be expected to continue into the future. Bottom line, people are cooperating with each other and developing rules and procedures and policies for how they interact both within nations and between nations, and this is one of the consistent arcs of history. Peter also talks about how the open sea lanes are, he makes it seem like when the United States withdraws, the withdrawal will be relatively sudden and the collapse of open sea lanes will be pretty quick. And certainly the United States is reevaluating the degree to which it's willing to act as the global cop of the oceans and get involved in Middle Eastern squabbles and that sort of thing. However, as a mature nation, we know that our national security and defense are directly tied to the global balance of economic and military power. As long as other nations have nuclear capabilities, the United States will continue to invest heavily in a military that can project power on a global basis. That means a naval power. So that's not going to go away. Now, what can be expected to change is that the United States will be encouraging its alliance partners, nations such as the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, Australia, India, to invest in carry a more significant burden of the cost in both terms of both blood and treasure to keep the ocean safe. Now, I mentioned Germany because even though Germany is not currently a naval power like the other nations that I mentioned are, Germany has a significant economic ability to either contribute to naval power projection or to actually develop its own navy. It has the ability to do that. It's not completely cut off from the oceans. Now, one of Peter's central tenets is that population collapse is an ongoing thing, that it's irreversible. And this is, again, a central premise of his book. And this is going to happen in many countries, but probably nowhere is it going to be more dramatic than in China. Now, people are smart, and the leaders of countries are typically very smart and also resourceful. Countries that are not threatened with population collapse that are currently threatened with population collapse are not without a whole variety of societal control mechanisms that they can exercise to help them mitigate and even potentially reverse the collapse. Now, China has already begun experimenting with and addressing this issue with a variety of incentives, and as of yet, they have not experienced a great success, but that doesn't mean they won't. China has several options that, if it exercises them in a timely fashion, could potentially slow or even possibly reverse population collapse. So the things that can be done are economic incentives, basically outright financial incentives and subsidies, housing subsidies, providing larger housing to larger families, educational subsidies, of course, for university or trade schools, whether they're internal or international schools that they send students to. Promotion subsidies. China controls how businesses operate. And if China wants to really encourage people to have larger families, they could easily put into place a mechanism where HR departments have to give first priority to the people that have larger families for promotions. I mean, China has tremendous control over its population in every aspect as a communist country. And so it is not without lots of levers that it could use while it's currently trying a variety of things and they're not really becoming too successful. That doesn't mean they won't be. If China were to rally people around a newly perceived national emergency of population decline or collapse, and at the same time elevate the status of larger families by a combination of subsidies and special status and recognition and a variety of other things, economic incentives, it is very likely that the population would respond. Nationalistic fervor, if properly nurtured, is the proper tool for the job. If the population replacement rate could possibly be increased within the next decade from where it is now at 1.3 to 3.0, in other words, if China could instill the culture of recognizing the importance of big families, then it is certainly possible that within 20 years, China could have a much larger, new, younger population coming along, which then is both a consumer base as well as a future worker base to help alleviate the problems that they're going to have in the 20 to 40 year time frame into the future. These same tools are available to other nations. The exact mix of how they're implemented and the degree to which they'll be effective are going to be a matter of experimentation and will be interesting to watch unfold. Now, the big ideas in Peter's book were really very simple. The population collapse coupled with the United States pulling back from its role as the global cop and keeping the sea lanes open, that those two things together would result in a cascading sequence of events starting with deglobalization, which would lead to deindustrialization, which would lead to some level of de-civilization, which would have the ultimate result of having massive famine. These are the big ideas behind the book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning. And Peter does an incredible job of presenting this as an inevitability. But one of the things about history is we know that it doesn't always turn out the way that you predict that it will. So if we were to look at the big ideas and challenge them, we could probably say that population collapse, while it is going to happen, isn't necessarily going to be a full-on collapse. It might be more of a gradual decline, slower than he's predicting. When nations realize the urgency, they can take steps to mitigate the impact. And as far as the end of open sea lanes, that is probably never going to fully materialize. There is a lot of opportunities for countries to regionally come together and keep the sea lanes open, and whereas the United States won't necessarily be the dominant partner, as in the U.S.-centric sort of cop of the ocean situation that we have now, that will that can be shared by a variety of nations, and the sea lanes can be kept open. So that could reduce the impact of the deglobalization. So we might, instead of deglobalization, have some reduced level of globalization. There could be, instead of deindustrialization, there could be a significant shifting of industrialization. Now, that would naturally, the countries that are wealthier, that have access to capital, would be better able to do that than countries that are not as wealthy. And so there might be some countries that are come out on the lower end of the success ladder, if you will, on the reindustrialization, the shifting of economic fundamentals within a nation that might have specialized in one thing and have to retool their economy because of the shifting of industrial patterns. There is likely to be a regionalization of trade and a slowing of growth in the lesser developed nations. And while famine certainly is a real possibility, there is a real probability that it will be less intense than what Peter is putting forth in his book. So Peter presents a lot of things with a sense of inevitability about them, that they're going to be catastrophic and cataclysmic. And the reality is that it's probably going to be not quite as catastrophic and cataclysmic as Peter is indicating. That doesn't mean that there won't be severe repercussions. It's just, I don't think Peter's taking fully into account the flexibility and the ability of nations to be able to see what's coming and make adjustments along the way. Now, I think there's a real interesting dynamic that is not fully explored, and that is a potential renewal in China. I think China is ripe for a new revolution. China and the Chinese people are very pragmatic. It is simply not possible to look at the various political and economic systems that are operating around the globe and not come to the conclusion that the capitalistic economic system coupled with a democratic political system literally results in a more successful raising of people out of poverty and elevating the economic and military power of the nations that have those systems. It is simply undeniable. Now, the Chinese people have experimented with capitalism fleetingly, and they have experienced its power and its potential. So I think there's a real strong argument that the next revolution in China may very well be a political move towards democracy. China has been sending students to the United States and many other Western nations for decades. Many of these people are now elevated in both business and governmental positions where they have some level of power and influence. Many others are working in lower level positions. All of them have seen the reality of how democracy and capitalism work, and they carry this knowledge back to China with them. Now, they represent a powerful element of potential cultural reformulation that is at work currently within the Chinese system. The question is can these people exert enough pressure to be able to change the Chinese system? Well, the answer is not if they're unmotivated. If the United States and the Western world were to use their economic power to isolate China from the Western economies, unless and until China were to begin evolving into a more capitalist and democratic form of government, then we could help China move into a more productive future. To do this, we need to make sure that the Chinese people know that we are not against China or the Chinese people, but rather that we're against the Chinese Communist Party. Denying Chinese individuals and businesses the opportunity to own real estate in the United States should be a central tenet of our political and economic policy towards China. Denying the Chinese people the option to secure their wealth by purchasing real estate in the United States forces them to look at their own government and to change that government into one that allows for the protection of personal property ownership rights and individual rights and liberties. As long as the United States continues to provide a sort of safety valve for the Chinese people to protect their wealth by investing it in the United States, we are actually enabling the Chinese Communist Party to continue to exercise political and economic aggression against their own population, and we are financially supporting their aggressive military ambitions in their own region. As long as the United States facilitates the economic development and growth of the Chinese Communist Party, we support our economic and ideological competitor. Now is the right time for the United States to take firm, clear steps to let the Chinese people and the CCP know that we want to see genuine changes in their behavior. This is in the best interest of the Chinese people and the United States. If you like this book critique and the ideas that I put forth, please subscribe to my channel and click the like button. Thank you very much.